What up, gamers? And today we'll be talking about a hot new composition that is taking over China right now, and that is the 5 faded 4 Dryad. So it's just a new faded variant, and it's just starting to make its way over to the Western regions, but has been performing quite well in China recently. And just to show you guys some stats, even in the Western data, you know, this data excludes China. And if you have 5 faded 4 Dryad and a Syndra 2-star, the AVP is 3.91 with 5,000 games. Diamond Plus. So not a huge sample size, but that is some really good data for us right now, especially since we already know it's performing quite well in China. So let's talk about the composition and when to play it and all that good stuff. So here's the completed level 8 board, and we'll talk more about that in a second. But what is the indicator to play this comp? Why would you play this comp? So the whole point of this comp is that we are actually going to be using our Dryad stacks. I know, not something that you really think about too much, especially whenever you're like splashing Dryad in the late game. The only time you ever really think about Dryad stacks is when you're rerolling the Dryad units and you get mulched and stuff like that. And so you don't really need to worry about it because you're always playing the Dryad units. So it's not really something you think about. But the idea of this comp is that you start the game with a Dryad. So like if you have a opener that's like a Rek'Sai 2-star opener and you have like a mana gain item or Morello and a Kindred, well, that's a really good indicator to look to play this composition because you can start getting the early Dryad stacks and you can get a lot of tempo, especially if you have an item to build for Kindred and a Rek'Sai 2. You can really start to pump in the early game, start getting your stacks. What I've read on Reddit when I've been reading some of the Reddit guides for this and Twitter on the people who have been analyzing the Chinese ladder is that ideally you're aiming for like 50 stacks by the time you get to your level 8 comp. But again, I don't think you really need to concern yourself with that because you play this comp when you have the opener for it. You can look to play it. I think that's the idea. Here's what the completed comp looks like on level 8. And so we're just playing the 5 faded units. 5 faded units will always be the same. It'll always be Ahri, Thresh, Set, Kindred, Syndra. And before you hit Set, obviously you can play Yasuo here. And then your Dryad units are always going to be Gnar, Kindred, Ornn, Azir. Obviously, before you hit Azir, just have the Rek'Sai splash in. You could be good to go. And if you end up building AD items earlier on in the game, like you want to carry a Set in the late game, because that is one of the win conditions, is you have Syndra to main carry, Kindred to utility carry, and then Set to take you home. If you end up slamming items like this, then you can just throw them onto a Gnar 2-star, especially if you built a mid game to give you a lot of tempo. That helps you get some stacks. And just make sure you hold extra copies of Gnar. So as soon as you hit Set, you can sell and rotate the items over because Set 1 is always going to be stronger than Gnar 2. Doesn't matter how many stacks you have in your setup here. Cool. And then the way that we cap this board, obviously, is we want to hit our Azir, we hit our Sets. And then when we go level 9, we just add an Annie. Very easy add right there. If you hit a random Udyr 2, you could play Udyr 2 over an Annie, of course. And you could be good to go there. So let's talk about some itemization. So on Syndra in the data, this setup looks really good in this composition, especially if you have augments like this. So blue buff plus Nashor's plus 1 is really insane, especially if you have defensive augments like Combat Caster and Martyr. Because you just want her to be chain casting as much as possible. You could maybe try the blue buff adaptive setup that has been kind of gaining some popularity lately. That could be good as well. It just doesn't reflect in the data right now, so I'm not going to be recommending that. If you don't have these defensive style augments, then blue buff Gunblade plus 1 is probably very good in this setup. Let's talk about faded bonus real quick. The faded bonus you want to use, since we are not dipping into Arcanist, Syndra is the main carry. We're going to use Syndra and Ahri as our faded bonus. You could consider hyper late game going Syndra and Set, especially once your Set starts to stack up and your Set, or if you get Set 2-star and he starts to be your main carry, then strongly consider Set plus Syndra. But in general, it is Set plus Ahri right here, and you'll be good to go. Stack your leftover tank items onto Ornn is typically going to be your best slot, but if you think you're going to hit a Thresh 3, then you can put the items here, and that can be good to go. A setup like this on Ornn is fantastic because Ornn will cast early, farming items for either your Set or your Thresh, and then having a Warmogs which combos with the Protectors out. This is just a really good item combination, but also helps out Set a lot because you just want to have a lot of HP to help Set stack. So let's talk about augmentations and why you want to take things like Combat Caster, Baboom, and Martyr. I feel like it should be really obvious. All of your units have very low mana cost. So things like Combat Caster and Baboom are just going to be super OP because Kindred, Syndra, all that stuff. And then Martyr is just really great defensive augment in this because, again, our team has so much HP. Ornn, Gnar, Kindred, Azir, they're all stacking HP from the Dryad. And then back over here, Syndra, Syndra, it allows you not to have to build a healing item, and you can be sure that she'll be alive for a long time if you have things like Combat Caster and Martyr. So let's look over at augmentations here and just look at the stats. So if we look at the stats, we'll sort by placement. As you can see, Martyr, Baboom, Combat Caster, those are the ones we put on there. But a lot of other good ones are here too, like Inspiring Epitaph, Little Buddies, Harm Assist. So healing, good in this comp, obviously. Lucky Gloves can be very good. It's just very good for tempo, of course, right? Little Buddies, Epoch. Yeah, just generally you want to go for combat augments, it looks like here. Obviously we have Epoch on here, but Epoch, you know, gives you some tempo, all that good stuff. But in general, we want these combat augments, and especially the ones that give us a little bit of healing, some sustain, and play on our ability to, that we cast a lot, right? Combat Caster and that sort of thing. So that's going to be good for you. Okay, so talking about mid game. So ideally, you just want to play strongest board, right? You know, in general, you know, you play around Rek'Sai, play around Gnar, play around Kindred, play strongest board. But if you need to roll on level 6, here is a generic comp that you can look for on level 6, and you can carry your Kindred and your Gnar. And again, if you add the same AD items, like you're going to move them to set, just throw them on Gnar, right? And throw your AP items on Kindred, you know, build your blue buff Morello or adaptive Morello +1. If you end up 3-item itemizing Kindred, and she's holding a lot of the items that you really want to put on a Syndra later, just make sure you hold extra copies of Kindred, or just look to make those items twice. You know, like if you can build 2 blue buffs or a blue buff and an adaptive late game, that those items, you know, you can just keep the blue buff on Kindred and Morello, and then, you know, you could slam like an adaptive on Alawi and then move the item over to Syndra as well, because Kindred can give you so much mid-game tempo if you need it, especially a mana gain item plus Morello. So do not be afraid to slam your items on Kindred. It can give you a lot of tempo. So you can roll for a comp that looks kind of like this, or just 5 Faded plus 2 Dryad. You always need to have 2 Dryad active, because again, we want to get those stacks rolling. We want to get those stacks rolling. Anyways, so it's just some final thoughts on the comp. I guess we can go through some stats a little bit here. Just looking at some unit values, I guess we can kind of dig into this a little bit. It's interesting looking at these placement values here, but again, 100 games. As you can see here, the added unit onto the comp increases our placement by so much. It has a negative 1.27 delta is Annie. So as soon as we hit Annie, we add it onto our comp, increases our placement so high. Azir, another one, again, you know, hitting Azir over Rek'Sai, the delta is negative 1.89. So obviously this turns up our comp very heavy. And then Udyr, like I said, again, he has a pretty good delta, 0.49. So hit 0.49. So he's great to add into your composition late game. But it just looks like Annie is the better spot in general. Annie, the great CC, gives your whole team mana gain. You'll be good to go there. So look to play Annie, but I think if you hit an Udyr 2-star, you could consider doing that as well. So anyways, these are pretty much the final thoughts here. Just in synopsis, remember, look to play this when you have an upgraded Rek'Sai and you have like either mana gain or Morello, something that really juices up Kindred in the early mid game. And you have a Kindred and you could play around, you just want to have Dryad active the whole game, play strongest board, and then look for this. And then once you hit this comp, once you enter Syndra 2, go 9 and play an Annie 2-star and look to upgrade your set, Azir, Syndra, and Annie is going to take you home in the late game. Anyways, guys, that's pretty much it for the build. Good luck playing this composition. Good luck climbing. And I'll see you on the next one.